Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Our first guest may be the most traduced filmmaker in the British Isles. People quote her saying things she never said or doing things she never did. Some call her anti-Semitic, without telling you that she is in fact Jewish and is married to a Jew and lives in a once rather typical Jewish leftist household.
Nonetheless, when they tied her to the docking stool, she floated, and so she must be a witch. She's been expelled out of the Labour Party, of which she was a prominent member. Her meetings have been disrupted by death threats, intimidation, and cancellation.
Her film, WitchHunt, has been metaphorically burnt by the book burners. She's hoping the same won't happen to the new book by Noam Chomsky, to which she is a contributor. She is, of course, Jackie Walker, and she joins us now. Jackie, welcome.
Hi.
On board the Sputnik. Let's get one thing out of the way first. Anti-Semitism is a thing, and perplexingly, it exists on the left as well as existing on the right. And that in itself is an alarming state of affairs.
Well, what's alarming about it is that there's been an equal sign put against the left and the right, i.e. that it's the same on the left as it is on the right. There is anti-Semitism on the left, but you can't compare it with what's happening on the right and the far right. And I think we have to be very clear about that. Most of the anti-Semitism I have ever seen on the left, it comes from ignorance. And what we do, because we're socialists, we actually educate people. We raise levels of awareness. We don't point fingers, which is what's happening now. And if you want to make people into racists, you behave like the Labour Party and the media are doing at the moment. You point fingers and you start screaming racist at them.
You see, the hatred on the left for bankers, for example, or for Netanyahu and events in Israel-Palestine, to some extent, amongst some young left-wing people, through ignorance, mostly, I'll grant you, that has metamorphosed into the danger of anti-Semitism. For example, I get people mentioning the name Rothschild to me all the time, as if Rothschild owned the banking system, which he doesn't. People imagine that the media that they hate is owned by Jews, when actually none of it is in Britain any longer. There's not a single Jewish proprietor or owner of any media outlet here in Britain on any significant scale. You say, I tend to agree with you, that kind of foolish conflation has to be educated out of people.
Absolutely, because it's not part of the ideology of the left. As socialists, we're internationalists, and that's our interest in Israel. And for those of us who are Jewish, the obvious interest is about the fact that we have a state, which is an apartheid state, which says it acts for us when it doesn't. And that is something, as a Jew, that we have to stand up and say this is not a state that reflects Jewish values.
Well, when I was undercover for the African National Congress in apartheid South Africa, all of the people helping me, every house I stayed in, every car I drove in, every meal on the table that was put down for me was done by Jewish South African fighters of the ANC.
Absolutely.
And isn't this paradox vividly illuminated by Donald Trump's declaration that he's the king of Israel and that people in Israel think he's the chosen one, whilst he's attacking the 78% of American Jews that don't vote for him.
And not just the Jews. I mean, he is a racist, I mean, by any means that you can think of it. But those of us who understand what Zionism is about, what the actual root of Zionism is about, we're not surprised about the way that this confusion can happen, that you can get somebody who's a racist, like you get Tommy Robinson, who's an ardent supporter of Israeli Zionism.
But don't like Jews.
But don't like Jews,
Wow. That'll take some computing, perhaps, for some, but it was once ABC for those of us of a certain age.
Yeah.
You're much younger than me, of course, but on the left, this was a commonplace.
Yes.
And thus, errors were not made.
Yes.
Because we all knew that we were not against Jews.
Yes.
We were against the colonial nature of, for example, the state of Israel-Palestine.
Otherwise, you would be an Islamophobe for being against Saudi Arabia,
But
isn't
they've
it?
played a nice trick with us. They've played this trick of conflating Israel and Jews.
Yeah,
And
but her
it.
point is right, isn't it?
Yeah.
We hate Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Does that make us Islamophobes?
Exactly.
Anyway, we could spend all day talking about that. Just en passant, have you now accepted that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party has no place for you?
Well, I think it's got to improve itself before I would even think of it being a place for me.
You've more or less left Labour behind. You have no political ambitions. You never really did. You were never trying to become anything in the Labour Party. You're concentrating now as a playwright, as an author, and I hope as a filmmaker, because the film that was made about you, which was made, I think, 90% by Jewish people,
Yes.
has been metaphorically burned, and yet it is a brilliant piece of work. I cried, I must tell you, during it. I had a huge sense of injured indignation about it. Is that what you're going to concentrate on now, your literary and your other artistic output?
I still see myself as part of the Labour movement. The Labour movement is not the Labour Party. Being a socialist is not about being in the Labour Party.
Actually, for a long time it was.
Exactly.
Was the opposite.
In fact, being a socialist can sometimes mean acting outside of the Labour Party. So I see myself still in a critical position within the radical movement of anti-racist internationalism. And as that, what I'm now working on is an iteration of the play, The Lynching, which is now called Dangerous Black Women, which is going to develop and has developed much further. And we've got a creative director of one of the major black theatres who's on board. We have Alexi Sale as a script consultant. We've got all sorts of exciting things happening there. I'm going to be writing a book about my experience of the last 3 years. And then, apart from contributing to this book with and by Chomsky, I've also been recently asked to contribute to another academic book. So I haven't stopped. I've just begun.
Yes, quite so.
Can you tell us about the book? Because I think it's a revision.
It's a wonderful cover. I must say, it looks. Noam Chomsky, as a young man, is a particularly handsome
Cute.
hunk.
He's Kennedy,
Yeah, very cute, intellectual. So the book is based on one of his seminal essays called The Responsibility of Intellectuals. And this was written in 1967. And it was at that time, that time of, in America, where you were getting the struggle with civil rights, yes, but you were also getting that Vietnam War revolt of the young. And the question Chomsky was posing at that point is, what does it mean to be an intellectual? What is the responsibility of intellectuals? And this conference was held to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the writing of that seminal work, and I was one of the contributors, as was Chomsky, and this has now been turned into a book and published by UCL.
UCL, excellent. I mean, it really is terrific. I've just flicked through it, but I'm going to read it once you've signed it. What is the responsibility of an intellectual?
To tell the truth. And that is the problem that we're having at the moment. Because not just intellectuals as we think of intellectuals, i.e. academics and writers, but politicians, people in the media, as you know, commentators, are terrified to tell the truth of what is happening. And that is a very dangerous point in our society, because if the truth is not told by those who have access to the media and to communication in general, then what we're leaving the population open to is something very dangerous.
So how did this come about, this era? Is it self-censorship, as Francis Bacon called it, the arrow that flies in the night? You don't see it, but it's just as deadly. Is it self-censorship? Is it fear? Is it greed? Why have so many public intellectuals, leading figures, media figures, abandoned the responsibility to tell the truth?
I think it's a mixture of all those things. So let's be clear on what happens during a witch hunt, and that's what this is. This is a McCarthyite witch hunt. And if you put your head above the parapet, you risk your job, you risk your livelihood, your home. Your children could be attacked in the street. I'm talking about real things that have happened to people. You're going to have threats of being raped and being murdered. And there's not very many people who are up to doing that. And I'm afraid too many people on the left have forgotten that the left has not very many tools in its toolkit. We haven't got huge amounts of money. We haven't got hugely powerful friends or structures. We have one thing, and that's solidarity. That is our power. And
I don't see much of that.
And there isn't, and that's what I'm saying, and that is a real problem. And until we see more people stepping up, for example, and defending people like Chris Williamson, what's happened to him is a travesty. What's happened to Mark Wadsworth is shameful. What he was saying was absolutely truth. A report by the Labour Party on anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, and basically, apart from the report of Pinar, he was the only black person there, and nobody had noticed that. And he gets sacked, basically, because he stood up and said the truth of the matter.
Jackie Walker, best of luck with the book and your play. We look forward to coming to see it.
Thanks very much.
Invite us to the press night and we'll review it.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Coming up next, women